Hello, it is Wednesday, July 8th. I'm here with my dog who is sitting here chewing on a rawhide because she loves to sit by me and chew on a rawhide every time I do one of these videos. Um, Living with this COVID-19 and the fact that we're also isolated and spending so much time at home, uh, cases again through the roof. We keep doing over 1,000 cases a day now, and here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area being one of the hot spots in the country, and people passing away. But it's here to stay, so we're just learning to cope with it. But one of the things I've discovered that I find myself doing quite a bit, since I've got so much time on my hands, is I find myself reminiscing. Now, I don't know if it's because I'm 54 and all of a sudden I'm more than midway through my life and I'm looking back at my youth or what, but it's interesting that I find myself contemplating a lot more, and remembering things from my past and childhood and teenage years and all of that. And most of my memories are, looking back at my life, I've had horrible things happen to me. I really have had quite a few horrendous things happen to me. Like I mentioned the video for April 25th. Getting to personally meet a serial killer and being almost a victim. Growing up in Mexico, we had one massive event that happened when I was a kid. In 1974, so I was 9 at the time. Irapuato, the town I grew up in, central Mexico, is in the state of Guanajuato. So if you were to get a map of Mexico and you were to pinpoint the very center of Mexico, you would be pretty much exactly where I grew up. There's actually a big marker of a Jesus Christ on top of a mountain, kind of a la Rio de Janeiro, but not nearly as big, called the Cubilete, Cerro de Cubilete, that demarcates the geographical center of Mexico. And that was 30 kilometers from me, so we're talking about 15 miles away. So I really grew up in the heart of Mexico. But yeah, we had this horrendous flood in 74 and then another flood in 78 in the town of Irapuato. Now, at the time, I wasn't living in 74. We were, it was 74. We were living on the outskirts of town in Ciudad de los Olivos. Now, I can't remember if it was 74 or 72. No, it was 74 because the Olympics were 72. And that was a memory because I remember watching the Olympics when they had that whole hostage situation with the Israeli team that were murdered live on TV, and saw that, and that was the first time I really became aware of global events. That was shocking to see because that happened live on TV. Anyway, but going back to the flood, so Irapuato, where it's located in Mexico, we never had weather reports because it was either the dry season or the wet season. And the temperature, even though it's in central Mexico, the altitude is pretty high. It's like 7,000 feet. It varies in the region because it's very hilly. But so it's cool all year round. In fact, in August, you probably want to put on a sweater at night because it does drop down into the upper 50s, lower 60s in the summer. And then in the winter, it would get cold. It would drop down into the upper 40s. So the temperature was pretty cool all year round. But we had our wet season, our dry season. Usually our wet season started like mid-June and went through mid-September. It would rain literally every day. It'd be clear in the morning around noon. It starts to cloud up. Between 2 and 4, it would rain. After 4, it would clear up, and then the same thing the following day. And then in the wintertime, starting around mid-December, it rained one day. It didn't rain the following day. Pretty regular weather. And the temperature was pretty regular throughout the year. Our hottest month was May. It would get into like what would be equivalent to like the 80-degree mark here in the U.S., or maybe upper 80s, but then it would drop down at night back into the 60s. And our cold month was always January, and I think we dropped down to like into the upper 30s one time, but it was pretty mild all year round. So you didn't need air conditioning or heating in homes. But this weather was very regular with the rain and the dry season, the rainy season and the dry season. Well, we had a wet spring. Something we normally never had. For whatever reason, it was a very wet spring. And we were surprised. Now, there was a big dam called El Conejo. This was an earthworks dam that was built, I don't know, a century earlier. to tame one of the rivers in the area, the seasonal river, for the water that would serve the town. And it was way outside of the town, not too far from that mountain where the geographical center is of Mexico. And it didn't have locks like you would normally, like a modern day dam. So it had been raining and raining and raining and raining and raining, and it was filling up. And we hadn't hit a rainy season yet, and this dam was so old. So we were all a little concerned because, the dam's filling up. And then, of course, the rainy season started, and we're like, ooh. And because the dam was so old, they were afraid it was going to give out. And if it did, you'd have this wall of water coming down to the town. And at the town I grew up in, a lot of buildings were still built with adobe, which is basically mud bricks. So they weren't concrete. There were buildings built out of concrete, but a lot of it was still adobe construction. We had cobblestone streets in our town. There were still dirt streets in the town I grew up in at that point in time. Irapuato's now a big city, but back then it was a small town. You could walk across it literally from one end to the other. It would take you a while, but it was still walkable. So the Mexican government at the time was under Echeverria, which was one of the worst presidents in Mexican history, decided they might alleviate the situation of the dam and to let some water escape from the dam and alleviate the pressure. Now, Irapuato, like Mexico City, was built on a lake bed that got filled in by the Spanish. So we were the low point in the valley. And like Mexico City, there was more of a siltier ground. But we were basically the low point in the valley. So, and there was normally a natural lake there, but it had been filled in by the construction of the town. So we knew we'd get flooded when the Army Corps of Engineers decided they were going to crack open the dam and let water out to relieve the pressure. And that we would get in the town a few inches of water. Like they were saying about 10 centimeters of water, basically, was what we were told. 10 centimeters being less than a foot, like 8 inches of water. Inundate the city. Some places may get up maybe a little bit more like a foot. Other places may not get any at all. But you get the idea. Now, I lived on the outskirts of town in this subdivision, and there was a small hill between me and the town of Irapuato. So they announced when they were going to do it. Because the dam was so far away from the town, they said they would be doing it around midnight, so that by dawn, the water that would be trickling into the city was when everybody would be waking up. So they announced to everybody, you might want to lift up your furniture if you, be prepared. So the army decided they would go to the dam and they'd put some dynamite kind of on one side to see, to punch a hole in the dam, basically on one side, so that the water would relieve the water pressure. Well, the dam collapsed. It did blow the hole, but then, of course, the rushing water, it was an earthen dam. What do you think is going to happen? Erosion, a quick, fast erosion. It emptied out the dam within minutes. So people in town had gone to bed thinking, in the dawn hours, we're going to have a trickle of water slowly come into the town. What happened was a wall of water. We're not talking about a foot or 2 foot. We're talking about a 10, 12-foot wall of tsunami water, assisted by the fact that this dam was up in the hills. So gravity propelled it at even a stronger rate of flow. So we're talking literally a tsunami at a high speed. This entire dam emptied out. And it hit at night when people were not expecting it. It ended up being, depending on where you were in the town, 3 meters worth of water, about 10 feet of water. So once the water leveled out in the city, we're talking a hopeful story. The tallest building in our town was 4 stories tall. Most buildings were 1 story, and they were built out of this mud bricks, which dissolve when they're sitting in standing water. So we didn't realize that it happened that night. So in the morning, we knew that we were going to be probably without power because that happened a lot. We had power come and go. But we got up, there was no power. We expected that to probably happen. There was no running water. Okay, sometimes we had water shortages in the town, or the main water pump for the town wasn't working, so we'd go out without water for an hour or two until they fixed it. It was not uncommon. So we thought, well, let's just drive over to the top of the hill to look at the town. And I remember as a kid the shock of seeing this town I grew up in. All you could see was the second floor of two-story buildings, and the church steeples. Everything was underwater. All my friends that lived in town were inundated. The town was like gone. It was like you literally could only see the second stories, and in the three, the few taller buildings that were very few, and the church steeples. The shock, and of course the dawning of the realization: this is a lake bed. This water isn't going to go anywhere. It's going to be there, and it's going to have to evaporate away because there's no outlet for this water. So we decided to, basically, we lived outskirts of town, so, well, we got firewood. We did buy bottled water in Mexico because we couldn't drink water out of the tap. So we kind of like camped out where we were living for a few days, seeing if the situation was going to get any better. And it didn't, because the water remained. And we never found out how many people perished in the city, but they know 17 people in the Army Corps of Engineers because the wall of water killed that Army personnel. And unfortunately, there was a cemetery at the front, near the front of the blast of water, that unburied everybody in the cemetery. So there was caskets floating throughout the city. And then, of course, when it finally all dried out, there was caskets everywhere. Needless to say, there was a few farms and ranches on the north end of town. It drowned all the cows and the pigs and the chickens, and so it became a biohazard. We made national news, and we made international news because it was such a massive disaster. And but the president of Mexico was so proud. He was not going to accept any assistance from anybody, even though the United States was offering to help out the town I grew up in because it was such a disaster. What we ended up doing as a family, we ended up running up to Laredo for, and hang out in the United States for a week or two, or not even a week or two, for about a week, and then kind of meandered our way back to Irapuato to just check it out. And eventually the town did dry up because, curiously enough, the rainy season, there was this break in the rainy season right after that happened. So it did allow the water to finally be absorbed by the ground as well as evaporate out. But there were still areas of the town weeks later that were still underwater. So that was one of those awful disasters that just was so shocking as a kid and fascinating at the same time. None of my friends perished. But we had heard that quite a few people had. Nobody that we knew personally, thank God. But the shock of the footage, the photos that you could still pull up if you look at floods of Irapuato in 76, it's shocking imageries to see. Because some people caught the current of people hang on to poles as this current was coming through the town. There's some pictures of that type. But then afterwards, it wasn't funny. It's funny now because, you have to find humor even in the darkest things. So after this happened, they realized, with all this amount of dead animals, and you can only imagine the debris and the filth, it was going to take a while to clean up the entire town. An outbreak of typhoid fever began to happen. So they requested that everybody in the town get inoculated. So we all lined up to go to the Department of Health to go get inoculated against typhoid fever because there was an outbreak happening because of what was going on. And there was the kind that you could get the shot, or you could get the gun that just basically blew the medication through your skin. There was a way to do it without having to get an actual shot. And so that's the way we got ours. But one thing I forgot to tell everybody about a typhoid fever shot at the time, the type of vaccine they had for it. One of the symptoms of typhoid fever that can kill people is the paralysis, because it causes paralysis because the joints swell up so much. And when they give you the vaccine, at the time when they gave you the vaccine, they were giving you a weakened version, but it was still a live vaccine. So you were going to get a mild dose of typhoid fever. Symptoms include diarrhea, throwing up, intense fever, paralysis, and just aches all over your body. Which then, of course, everybody went and got inoculated. They did it within a matter of 3 days. And then the entire town was sick with typhoid fever. A weakened version, mind you, but the weakened version kind of knocked you out for like 5 days. It wasn't like you just felt bad for a day. You felt bad for several days. So once it was over and said and done with, because the Mexican government went to Irapuato to make sure we were all going to be healthy and not succumb to this infectious disease, they announced, oops, we gave you the wrong typhoid vaccine, because there's different types of typhoid. They had all inoculated the entire town with the wrong typhoid vaccine. We all need to go back and get revaccinated. I didn't know anybody who went for the second shot. We all, I think the entire town collectively said, as we say in Spanish, esto es un desmadre. This is all messed up. And you know what? We ain't going back for that second shot. We're just going to be extra hygienic to make sure we don't get the disease, because, oh my God, you already sickened us once. We're not going through that again. We'll take the risk. And curiously enough, the typhoid fever was just a few cases, and they were afraid it was going to spread, and it actually did not spread. So actually everybody kind of boycotting the second shot was like the right thing to do, because it was such a mess. So it's just one of those weird stories that I don't know why I was thinking about that today. And I thought, you know what? People who have known me don't necessarily know this story about me growing up in Mexico. Those people who are watching me in Mexico, Pablo Campos, Rebecca Serna, Jesus Carrera, you will remember this. Carlos Rodriguez, you will all remember that. So I had to share this story for my American friends that, and then 4 years later, a similar thing happened, except this time, they were able to install gates. When they rebuilt the dam, they did put gates so they could control the water flow better. And we had another exceptional rainy season, but by that point, I lived in the city itself, and the water came within an inch of our threshold, and then a truck drove by on the flooded street and created a wave, and a little bit of that muddy water came into our garage. So then we did have a second flood, but not to the level of the first one. And this time it was controlled, the water release. So anyway, that's a story from my childhood. As I say, these COVID days is making me reminisce about things about my past, and that was one of them. So I thought I'd go ahead and share it with you. So have a good evening if you watch this tonight. If you watch tomorrow, have a good morning or a good afternoon, whenever you watch it. And then please like, subscribe, ring the notification bell. I'll keep posting these funny little stories about me and stuff about me. I was really doing a chronicle, and the first group of 100 days is a chronicle pretty much the COVID-19. But now that we're living with it, I'll still update you guys on it, but then I'll just pepper in other stories and other stuff for this next set of videos. So have a good one, and wear your mask and be safe out there as I point at you. Bye.